Today I'm going to talk about June 44, a TTP game published by DDH Games. It is a game that comes in a Ziploc bag, as it is pretty common for games in this format, and it covers the events following the Allied landings in Normandy during World War II. It is a game that made me curious when I saw that it had won the Charles Roberts Award for Best TTP Game in 2008. Also, it has been republished in Japan, which is unusual. Usually it is war games from Japan that are republished here. So I just decided I would pick it up and I would give it a try, which I did, and so today I'm going to share my impressions with you. What you see here is the initial setup with the Allied player ready to invade and with several paratrooper divisions that already landed. And it's interesting because you place those divisions face down on the map and not even the owning player knows exactly what they are. So you do not know exactly who landed where, which is interesting. It feels very realistic. Then you can start moving your units around once the game starts. Of course, you flip them and you can consolidate the paratrooper divisions into stronger units. Another factor that creates fog of war is in the beach defenses that the German player owns, and he will place them face down so that the LA player does not know exactly where the strongest ones are. The only way of figuring it out is by starting to invade. Also, if you're playing solitaire, then you just place them down without looking what they are, and so that adds a little bit of unpredictability. But what is the point of the game? Well, the Allied player is trying to take control of CTXs, which are scattered all over the map, and each CTX is worth 1 victory point with the exception of Caen. The 2 axes of Caen are worth 2 victory points each, but only for the first part of the game. Later in the game, they're just worth 1 victory point. Also, the German player can take away some victory points from the Allied player by regaining control of the beaches, but this is the idea. The game continues until, at the end of a German turn, the Allied player has 7 victory points. If that happens, then the game ends immediately in an Allied victory. Otherwise, the game continues until the last turn on July 6th, and at that point, if the Allied player has 6 victory points, the game is a draw. Otherwise, less than that, the German player is the winner. At the beginning of each turn, the players roll to determine several random factors that are in play for that turn, and those factors are important. So that gives a lot of unpredictability. It really forces you to grab opportunities as they are there because you do not know when they're gonna show up again. And in the long run, it also gives great replayability to this game. The first thing that the players do is to roll for weather, and they roll a 10-sided die, and as you can see, different types of weather will influence the number of naval points that are available to the Allied player for support and the number of Allied air units that can be used for support. Now, these Allied air units are very interesting. The Allied player will receive a number based on that. However, some of these units have mission success written on the back and some other ones have mission abort. The players will receive that number, but he doesn't know which ones he received, and he's not allowed to look before he places them down on the map, committing them to certain battles. Only once the battles start is the player allowed to flip them and to see if the support is successful, so he gets a bonus in that battle, or nothing happens. There is no air support in that battle. The weather also determines whether or not the German player has a penalty of movement because, of course, the better the weather, the more efficient is the Allied interdiction. And there might be cases with clear weather that really the German player barely manages to move because -2 on the movement points of all of his units is going to be a lot. So you see, it's not like there's like a day has something good for everybody and bad for everybody. There are going to be days that are going to be terrible for the German player and excellent for the Allied player, and days that are going to be very good for the German player. He can move normally, and absolutely terrifying, absolutely scary for the LA player. Next, the players will roll on the supply replacement table that will tell them how many replacement points they have available for that turn, replacement points that can be spent to flip reduced units back to their full side or to bring back in the game units that have been destroyed. But even more important is the number of supply points that the Allied player gains. This is only Allied supplies. And this is different from the usual lines of supply. You still have those, you still have to demonstrate that you can trace a line to one of your supply sources, otherwise you get all sort of penalties, but then you have this other factor, which is different. each time the ally player wants to perform an attack, launch an attack, he has to spend 1 supply point from this pool. Now, this pool can be increased turn after turn, he can save supply points, but this is the idea. You do not have supply points, you do not get to attack. Then before the operations on the board start, the players will draw up to 2 cards from this deck, and as you can imagine, these cards will create special effects. They might affect the sky, the weather, they will just affect the situation on the board, like in every other card in hand's game. Of course, yeah, I say this because this is not a card-driven game. You really cannot base your strategy just waiting for a certain card, because that's not gonna work. At the same time, I'm not always a fan of cards in card in hands war games. Sometimes the cards feel like an afterthought or just added to be cool and modern. Not here. I find that these cards really add a lot of flavor to the game. They just make sense. They're very well integrated in the story. They work well, they open interesting opportunities, so I really like them. Once you start playing for a couple of turns, you soon realize that this game is non-symmetrical. Not because the rules are different for the 2 sides, but just because the map and the goals of the 2 players will force them to create different strategies, to go about their goals differently. In fact, the German player, as we said, has less units and usually less powerful units, while the LA player is just putting people in. The German player will have to exploit the possibilities that are offered by the map. And I believe that the map has been designed with that in mind, to give the German player a chance to balance things in that way. In fact, as you can see in this map, there are almost no clear access. Everything is farmland, swamps, bocage, forest. So almost every X on the map gives an advantage to the defender. And here is going to be the German player that in most cases is going to be able to exploit that. The cities, they give the best defensive bonus of the entire game. And again, it's probably going to be the German player that in most cases is going to be sitting there waiting for the LA player to come and try to dislodge it. From there. Also, these hexes not only do provide good defensive bonus, but also they slow down movement a lot. It is extremely hard to move in places like the swamps, for example, or the bocage. Actually, it is almost impossible to go anywhere by going through these places. You need to use the roads because those annul the penalty given by the terrain, which again means that the German player can concentrate the defenses on several specific locations only, in the bottlenecks in which the ally player has to go if he wants to go anywhere. Other rules: there are no retreats in this game. You can keep hitting a certain unit and the unit will just flip, and then maybe you bring another one and then you have to flip that one. It may take a while and it's going to be a lot of attrition before finally the LA player can advance in certain areas if the German player really wants to defend them. Another thing is that zone of control here is stricter than in many other games. In many war games, once you enter a zone of control, you have to stop. Here, that happens too. But then you can move next turn from zone of control to zone of control as long as you stop again. Well, here it is more restricted because if you want to move from a zone of control to another zone of control and then stop there, you need to already have a friendly unit there. So in this case, for example, this would be a legal move, but as you can see, it can be problematic because how do you place a unit there? If you place a guy there, then you cannot go there because there are no friendly units. You can try to go from there. Well, same problem. You cannot move from zone of control to zone of control. So actually, again, by placing the units wisely, the German player can create areas in which it's going to be extremely hard for the LA player to infiltrate. Combat is always from one X into another X, and the way we resolve it is first you determine the total combat strength of the attacker by adding up the combat strength of the units involved in the attacking X. Then if there are the units adjacent to the X that is being attacked, those units can give flank support. You don't add up the entire combat strength, only just the standard number of 1. Then you can have artillery, then maybe landing support. You may have air support that is committed to a battle. If the battle is within 5 axes from the ocean, you can also have naval support. So you have that total for the attacker, and then you add up the total combat strength of the units defending, the defending value, and also any modifiers related to the terrain. Once you have the total combat strength of both the attacker and the defender, you compare the two numbers and use the difference to determine the columns that you will use, that you players will use to roll dice in that battle, because both attacker and defender get to roll dice in all battles. Suppose the one of two players has a total combat strength of 12, the other player has 9, the difference is 3, then the player with the 12 will use the +3 column, and the player with the 9 will use the -3 column. Then they will roll a 10-sided die, and then we will just see what the result is. Can be no hits, one hit, and the owning player decides what unit takes the hit, or in very rare cases, 2 hits can be dealt in one combat turn. I like this game for a variety of reasons. I like how it combines smooth and very accessible fast gameplay with still a good historical flavor. I think that really they managed to package a good amount of theme and chrome in what is, after all, a pretty linear, straightforward design. I like that. That's definitely a good thing. I like the fog of war that you have in certain aspects of the game, and the unpredictability that comes from the weather and the supplies, which of course makes for interesting challenges. Also helps the game be very suitable for solitary playing, and at the same time, it also gives a great replay value, I think, because trying to play a game where the storms hit very often is going to be a very different game from another game where it's always clear skies. The two sides play differently, and I like that. It even adds more to the replay value. If you play the two sides, you have to think differently. I see something maybe might look like a problem at the beginning. I see how at the beginning the German player might feel like the LA player is completely unstoppable, but if the German player really starts using the terrain and is also controlled well, then he can put together a strong defense, and then the game can end really close. Also, the combat, not everybody may like it because it feels a little static and may feel limiting, because the idea actually is precisely this. You want to pin down your opponent, trying to stop him there. So there is this continuous attrition. Again, it might feel bananas, but I actually think it works very well with the theme. I like how you had this sense of the two armies that will not go back, will not retreat no matter what. They'll stay there until the last man. And this sort of like creates a sort of like slow countdown. As the LA player, I'm looking at the turn track and it feels like it's running too fast, and as the German player, I look at the same turn track and I feel like it's taking forever to reach the end, which is of course what I'm hoping for. I think there are a lot of fun things that happen in this game, and you can have quite some fun playing it. I really enjoyed it, and I would recommend it. June 44, what I think is a good DTP game.